She sent her best friend one last text message. "It's going amazingly well, I just click with him so well." It was the last message Grace would ever send. The next morning, on her 22nd birthday, she had vanished. While her family and friends launched a desperate, global search, her date was caught on camera. He wasn't panicking. He was methodically buying a large suitcase, he was buying cleaning supplies, and he was preparing for another date, with another woman, for that very same afternoon. This is the story of a private game used as a defense. A complex lie built to hide a horrifying truth, and a digital trail that revealed a plan, set in motion before the date had even begun. If you're ready to uncover this chilling and tragic case, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. You are not going to want to miss a single detail. It was December 2nd, 2018. For Grace, it was a milestone. It was her 22nd birthday. It was meant to be a day of celebration, a bright punctuation mark on a backpacking journey that had taken her from the familiar comforts of England to the green, sprawling landscapes of New Zealand. But the day began with silence. Her phone, the slim black rectangle that was her lifeline to friends and family, lay dormant. In the shared room at the hostel, the morning light did little to disturb it. The first message had arrived just after midnight, a cheerful emoji-filled text from a friend back home, timed perfectly to land as the day turned over. It went unread. Another message followed an hour later, this one from a new friend at the hostel. "Happy birthday, see you at breakfast." It, too, remained unread. By 9 in the morning, her friends began to wonder. They gathered in the hostel's common area, a space usually buzzing with plans. They checked their own phones. Grace was always online, always responsive. A flicker of annoyance turned into a small, cold speck of concern. She had gone on a date last night, a man from an app. She had been excited, texting them just before she went. Perhaps she was just sleeping in. Perhaps the date had gone so well that she was still with him, her phone off, the world forgotten for a morning. They decided to give her time. Thousands of miles away, in England, the time difference meant the day was just beginning. David Mullane woke with an immediate thought of his daughter. He had sent his own birthday message hours ago, a loving note from a father proud of her adventure. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, his thumb swiping to their message history. His text sat there, delivered but not read. He frowned. A knot of unease, cold and unwelcome, settled in his stomach. This was not like her. She knew he worried. She was meticulous about checking in, even if just for a moment. He tried to reason with himself. She was an adult. She was on the other side of the world. Time zones were a complication. She was likely asleep or busy or had simply forgotten to charge her device. But the feeling would not leave. It was a low, humming frequency of wrongness, a parent's intuition that something was out of place. He stared at the unread message, the silence stretching across the continents, feeling heavy and absolute. Back in Auckland, her best friend, the one she confided in most, sent another text. "How was the date? Text me, and happy birthday." This message joined the others, a growing list of well wishes and questions met with the same digital void. There was no reply. There was no sign she had even seen them. The only reply was the ghost of her last communication, sent the night before. A message that glowed with happiness and possibility, a message that now seemed to hang in the air, a stark and chilling contradiction to the silence of the morning. Her last words to her friend, full of the excitement of a new connection. "It's going amazingly well. I just click with him so well." The phone remained dark. The birthday had begun, but Grace was nowhere to be found. The silence of December 2nd stretched into December 3rd, and then the 4th. The unread messages on Grace's phone piled up, a silent testament to a life paused. The unease that began as a small knot in her father's stomach had grown into a global, desperate search. By December 5th, 2018, the formal report was filed. Grace was officially a missing person. The investigation began immediately. The Auckland police understood the urgency. A young woman, a traveler in their city, had vanished. They started at the hostel, the last place she had called home. Her belongings were still there, untouched. Her passport, her backpack, the debris of a journey cut short. The detectives began their hunt for what she had left behind. Her digital ghost. They pulled the hostel's surveillance footage first. There she was. The timestamp read 5:37 p.m., December 1st. She was seen leaving the building, walking with purpose, a young woman on her way to a date. From there, the city's vast network of cameras became their map. It was painstaking work, a game of connecting dots, following a single figure through the evening crowds. They found her again at a popular public spot, a place with many people, making her feel safe. And there, they found him. He was a man named Jesse, the man from the app. The footage showed them meeting, talking, smiling. From the outside, it looked like any other date. The detectives followed the new pair. They tracked them to a bar, where they sat for over an hour, their body language relaxed. The trail led them on. At 7:15 p.m., they appeared at a Mexican bar, ordering more drinks. Then, at 8:30 p.m., they were at a third location, a place called the Blue Stone Room. They were comfortable with each other, leaning in, laughing. It was there, at 8:54 p.m., that the cameras captured a small, intimate moment. They shared their first kiss. The image was clear. It was not forced. It looked, for all the world, like the amazingly well she had texted her friend. The detectives felt a chill. This image, so full of promise, was a terrible counterpoint to the reality of her disappearance. The trail did not end there. Shortly after the kiss, the footage showed them leaving the bar. They walked together, side by side, heading through the city streets. The digital ghost led the detectives to the front doors of the City Life Hotel. The police requested the internal footage. The lobby cameras picked them up, two people heading back to his room after a successful night. They waited for the elevator. They stepped inside. The detectives watched the final, grainy images. Grace stood beside him, looking ahead as the doors began to close, sealing them inside the small, ascending box. The doors shut. The digital trail went cold. That was it. That was the last time anyone, anywhere, had seen Grace alive. The detectives continued to watch the hotel's video feed. They had seen the elevator doors close on Grace and Jesse at 9:41 p.m. on December 1st. Now, they searched for movement on December 2nd. They watched the footage speed up, hours passing in minutes. They were looking for Grace. They were hoping to see her walk out of that elevator, perhaps looking tired, perhaps heading out for a birthday breakfast. They never saw her. Instead, at 8 the elevator doors opened again. It was Jesse. He was alone. He wore the same clothes from the night before, now creased and rumpled. He stepped out into the lobby, his movements not hurried, not panicked. He seemed calm, almost thoughtful. As he walked toward the exit, he cast a long, suspicious glance directly at the lobby camera, a look that lasted a fraction of a second too long before he pushed through the glass doors and out into the morning. The investigation team switched back to the city's network of cameras, picking up his trail. He walked with purpose. This was not a man wandering aimlessly. His first stop was a large warehouse store on Elliott Street. The detectives followed him on the store's internal feed. He went to the luggage section. He did not simply grab the first bag he saw. He was methodical. He approached a large, dark-colored suitcase. He laid it flat, unzipped it, and opened it wide. He looked at it, his head tilted. He pressed his hand into its depth, as if measuring. He checked the width. The detectives watching the footage felt a cold dread settle upon them. He was not checking for capacity for a holiday. He was checking for a specific, non-negotiable size. He was checking to see if something would fit. Satisfied, he zipped the suitcase, placed it on its wheels, and proceeded to the checkout. He paid and walked back out, pulling the large, empty suitcase behind him. His errands were not finished. 25 minutes later, he appeared on the cameras of another store. This time, he went to the cleaning aisle. He gathered an array of items. He selected a bottle of carpet cleaner. He took several sponges, heavy-duty trash bags, and a large container of bleach. He added a pair of rubber gloves to his basket. It was an arsenal of erasure. He paid and left, his purchases consolidated into a single bag. The detectives tracked him all the way back to the City Life Hotel. At 10:42 a.m., the lobby camera captured him re-entering. He was carrying the bag of cleaning products in one hand, and with the other, he pulled the brand new, ominously large suitcase. He did not look at the camera this time. He walked straight to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. The doors opened. He stepped inside. with his suitcase and his chemicals. The doors closed, hiding him once more inside the building. The detectives stared at the screen. A girl was missing on her birthday, and the last man to see her was now alone in his room with a new suitcase and enough bleach to scrub a crime scene. On that same day, December 2nd, 2018, Jesse was not just cleaning. He was not just managing the aftermath of the night before. He had plans. He had another date. She was waiting for him at a bar in the afternoon. She checked her phone, a little nervous, hopeful. His profile had been charming, his messages engaging. He arrived, and she recognized him instantly. He was wearing the same clothes from the night before, the same clothes the detectives had seen him in on the footage with Grace, but this new woman had no way of knowing that. She simply registered that he looked a little untidy, as if he had dressed in a hurry. But his words were smooth. The charm she had seen in his messages was immediate and powerful. He apologized for being slightly late, bought her a drink, and settled in. He asked her questions about her life, her travels, what she wanted to do. He leaned in, listening intently. For the first hour, it was perfect. He was attentive, funny, and seemed genuinely interested. She felt a connection, a click, just as Grace had. Then, abruptly, his energy shifted. It was subtle at first. His gaze drifted past her, his smile became fixed. He seemed to be listening to a different, internal conversation. She asked him a question, and he gave a vague, distracted answer. "Are you all right?" she asked. He focused on her again, but the easy charm was gone. It was replaced by a strange, searching intensity. "Yes, fine," he said. "I was just thinking about something. A hypothetical problem." She waited, expecting a story about a difficult boss or a problem with his apartment. "I wanted to ask you something," he continued, his voice lower now. "What do you do when you have a serious problem? Something you need to secure?" "Secure," she repeated, confused. "Like money? Or..." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Something more complicated. Something you can't just get rid of. Something you need to hide. Hide properly. From everyone." A cold feeling began to creep up her spine. This was not normal date conversation. "I don't understand. What are you talking about?" Hypothetically, he pressed on. "Let's say you had a difficult situation. A real mess. And the police might get involved. Where would you go? Where in this country is a place where no one would ever look? A place that's completely isolated." She stared at him. His eyes were locked on hers, unblinking. This was not a joke. He was not talking about work. The man who had been laughing with her moments before was gone. In his place was a stranger, intense and unsettling, who was wearing wrinkled clothes and asking about how to make a problem vanish from the police. I wouldn't know," she stammered. "I don't really know places like that." "Think," he urged, "deep in the bush, someplace remote. You must know somewhere." She felt a sudden, powerful need to leave. The air around them felt thick and wrong. Her mind raced, trying to find an excuse. Any excuse. She felt a primal instinct, a flight response that was deafening. "I just remembered," she said, her voice tight. "My friend. She's in trouble. I have to go. I'm so sorry." She began to gather her things, her hands trembling slightly. Jesse did not try to stop her. He did not ask what was wrong. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. He had already moved on, his mind seemingly back on his hypothetical problem. "Right," he said, as if she were a minor interruption. "Okay. See you." She walked quickly out of the bar, not looking back. She did not stop walking until she was several blocks away. She did not know what she had just escaped. She only knew that she had been in the presence of something deeply, terribly wrong, and she was grateful to be walking away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had just walked away from a man who, at that very moment, was in the middle of covering up the most profound, irreversible act. The silence that had started on Grace's birthday had now become a deafening, international roar. Her disappearance was no longer a local matter, a file on a detective's desk in Auckland. It was on the news in England. It was a headline in Australia. The story of the missing backpacker had a face, a name, and a family. And that family was now in motion. For David, the flight was an agony of suspended time. He was in a pressurized cabin, moving at hundreds of miles per hour across the globe, yet he had never felt so paralyzed. He was trapped between two impossible points, the home where he had last seen her and the city where she had last been seen. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He stared at the blank screen in front of him, but his mind was replaying every conversation, every text message. He scrolled through the photos she had sent him from her trip. Her smiling by a lake, her standing on a hiking trail, her face full of life and excitement. He searched them for a clue, a shadow, anything he might have missed. There was nothing. With every hour that passed, the cold dread in his stomach solidified. He pushed away the darkest thoughts, focusing only on the mechanics of the journey. He had to get there. He had to be on the ground. He had to do something. The powerlessness of being in the air, separated from her by an ocean and a wall of silence, was its own special kind of torment. When he landed in Auckland, he was met by detectives. They were somber, respectful. They spoke in low, careful tones. They told him what they knew, which was terrifyingly little. They had a last sighting. They had a name. They had a man they were tracking. But they did not have Grace. They told him what had to be done next. The investigation needed a public face. It needed pressure. So, on December 5th, 2018, David did the hardest thing he had ever done. He stood in front of a room of strangers, a room full of people with cameras and recording devices. The sound was a disorienting cacophony of questions and bright, percussive flashes. He held up a hand, and the noise subsided, replaced by an expectant, heavy hush. He took a breath, forcing his voice to remain steady. He began to speak. He did not speak of a missing person. He spoke of his daughter. He called her Grace, and his voice was full of a father's love. He described her. He talked about her personality, her kindness, her sense of adventure, how much she had been looking forward to this part of her journey. He painted a picture of a vibrant, beloved young woman, not a statistic. He made his appeal. He looked at the people in front of him, but he was speaking to the entire city, the entire country. As a family, we have been extremely concerned for her welfare, he said, his voice thick with a control that was costing him everything. I am asking for anyone who has seen, spoken to, or come into contact with Grace to come forward and contact the investigation. He pleaded for any detail, no matter how small. A sighting, a conversation, anything. Then his composure, so fiercely held, finally fractured. His voice broke, just for a moment, on her name. The raw, unfiltered pain of a father resonated through the room. The detectives watching from the side felt the weight of that moment. The case was no longer just an investigation, it was a promise. The search, which had been frantic, now became desperate. The footage of David's appeal was sent everywhere. The pressure was immense. They had to find an answer for this man. They had to find Jesse. On the afternoon of December 5th, 2018, the investigation had its focal point. The digital ghost, the strange errands, the second date, and the heart-wrenching appeal from David had all converged on one place. The City Life Hotel. Two detectives, their faces set in grim, professional lines, pushed through the glass doors into the lobby. They were not in uniform. They were quiet, blending in with the subdued afternoon traffic of guests and business people. They knew his name, they knew his room number, but they also knew he was unpredictable. They had watched him for hours on a screen, and the man they observed was methodical. They positioned themselves, one near the front desk, one with a clear view of the elevator bank. They were prepared to go up to his room, but a public intercept was cleaner, safer. They waited. The minutes ticked by, a bell chimed, an elevator was descending. The doors slid open, and there he was. Jesse. He stepped out, looking much the same as he had in the footage from days earlier. He headed toward the front entrance, his stride unhurried. He was perhaps 20 feet from the revolving door when he saw them. He did not know they were police, not for certain, but he saw two men who did not belong. They were watching him. Their stillness was a disruption in the lobby's flow. His gaze met one of the detectives. A flicker of something, not panic, but assessment, passed through his eyes. He did not stop walking, but his pace slowed for just a fraction of a second. Then he made his move. It was not a sprint for the door. It was a subtle, calculated shift. He angled his body away from the exit, as if he had just remembered something he'd forgotten at the front desk. He turned, beginning a casual stroll back toward the hotel's interior, a man with a simple errand. He was trying to melt back into the building, to get back to the elevator, back to the perceived safety of his room. It was too late, Jesse. The first detective called out. The name cut through the quiet lobby. Jesse stopped. He turned slowly, a look of mild, polite confusion on his face. Yes. The two detectives converged on him, their movements quick and practiced, boxing him in. Auckland Police, the first one said, his voice low. We'd like to ask you a few questions about Grace. The mask of confusion shifted, becoming one of concerned cooperation. Oh, of course, Jesse said, his tone earnest. Is she all right? I've been worried. We had a date, but I haven't heard from her. I thought she'd just moved on. We can talk about it down at the station, the detective said. It was not a request. If you'll come with us. Absolutely, Jesse said, nodding. He even smiled, a small, helpful smile. Whatever I can do to assist. This is just terrible. Of course, I'll help. He seemed, to any casual observer, like a concerned citizen, a man eager to do his civic duty. He was unaware of the hours of footage they had already secured. He did not know that they had watched him buy the suitcase. He did not know they had spoken to the other woman. He believed he was still in control of the story. He walked between the two detectives out of the lobby and into the waiting, unmarked car. He was a man going to assist with an investigation, fully confident in the lies he was about to tell. The room was quiet, with a low, mechanical hum from a recording device placed on the table. It was a neutral space, designed to be featureless, to offer no distraction. Jesse sat on one side, leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He looked like a man trying his best to be helpful. The lead detective, a man with patient eyes, sat opposite. Thank you for coming in, Jesse. We just need to fill in some gaps. As you know, Grace is missing. We are trying to reconstruct her last known movements. Of course, whatever I can do, Jesse said. His voice was even, his tone one of earnest concern. It's just awful. I can't believe it. Tell us about your date, the detective said. From the beginning, Jesse nodded, as if gathering his thoughts. He recounted the evening, his memory sharp. He named the bars. In the correct order. He described their conversation, painting a picture of a light-hearted, enjoyable evening. She was great, he said, a note of fondness in his voice. Just a really bright person, you know. Full of energy, talking about her travels. We just clicked. It was a really good night. He confirmed the timeline the police had already built. The walk through the city, the final bar, the kiss. He offered these details freely, cementing his role as a reliable witness. And then you went back to the City Life Hotel, the detective stated. That's right, Jesse said. We walked back. We were standing outside for a bit, just talking. Here, the narrative shifted. Here, the first version of the story, the carefully constructed lie, began. She was a real free spirit, Jesse continued, his expression thoughtful. She got a text from some friends, I think. She was talking about maybe meeting up with them. I told her it was late, she could. That, she was welcome to stay. But she wanted to keep her night going. She was that kind of person, full of life. The detective remained impassive, his pen still. So, you didn't go up to the room? No, Jesse said, shaking his head with a casual finality. We just said goodbye out front. A kiss goodnight, that was it. She said she might head back to her hostel or meet those friends. I told her to be safe, and she went on her way. He had delivered the lie flawlessly. It was simple, plausible, and it fit the free spirit persona he had created for her. It neatly severed his connection to her, placing her back out on the city streets, alone, where any number of things could have happened. And that was the last time you saw her? The detective asked. Yes, Jesse said, his brow furrowed with concern. I actually sent her a text the next day on her birthday just to say happy birthday and that I had a great time. But I never heard back. I just figured. She was a backpacker. I thought she'd just moved on, met someone else. You hear stories about that. I never, ever thought. That she was missing. The room fell silent for a moment. Jesse held the detective's gaze, his own eyes projecting nothing but sincere worry. The detective watched him. He had seen the footage. He had seen the elevator doors close, locking them both inside. He knew that everything Jesse had just said, from the moment they reached the hotel, was a complete fabrication. But he gave nothing away. "All right, Jesse," the detective said, closing his notebook. "Thank you. That's very helpful. We'll be in touch if we have any more questions." Jesse stood, pushing his chair back. "Of course. Please, find her. She's a wonderful girl." He walked out of the room, a man who had just given a perfect performance. The detective remained seated, listening to the sound of Jesse's footsteps fading down the hall. He stared at the recording device, which had captured every single calculated word. The first version was a lie. Now, they just had to find the truth underneath it. While Jesse was in the interview room, meticulously constructing his first version of the truth, a different kind of investigation was beginning. A small, quiet team of forensic specialists had gained access to his apartment at the City Life Hotel. They unlocked the door and pushed it open, and the first thing that hit them was not a sight, but a smell. The air was thick, acrid, and unnatural. It was the overpowering, chemical sting of bleach and industrial-strength carpet cleaner, a desperate attempt to sterilize the air, to scrub it clean of the past. The smell was so strong it made their eyes water. One officer noted that it was the smell of erasure. Visually, the room was almost spotless. It was unnervingly tidy, the bed was made. The surfaces were wiped down. It was the sterile, impersonal clean of a hotel room, but amplified, as if someone had tried to erase their own presence, their own DNA, from every possible surface. In the corner, they found the carpet cleaner. It was the large, red rental machine the detectives had seen Jesse wheeling into the elevator on the surveillance footage. A specialist touched the side of it. It was still faintly damp. The team leader, a woman who had seen hundreds of rooms like this, knew that a superficial cleaning was a confession in itself. People who had nothing to hide did not bleach their carpets. They began their work. They were not looking for what was visible, but for what had been hidden. They drew the heavy curtains, plunging the room into near-total darkness. The only light came from the specialized equipment they carried. The team leader prepared a chemical spray, the kind that reacts to the faintest traces of what the bleach was meant to destroy. She began to mist the carpet, starting from the area near the bed and working her way out. The fine spray settled onto the fibers. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, under the specific wavelength of the high-intensity light they used, the clean carpet began to tell its story. It was not a huge, obvious stain, it was something more sinister. It was the ghost of a stain, a series of faint, reactive patches that glowed a sickly, ethereal color. The patterns showed where someone had knelt. They showed where something had been dragged. They showed, most damningly, the frantic, circular patterns of a scrubbing brush. The bleach had not removed the evidence, it had only smeared it, thinned it, and driven it deeper into the padding. The room remembered. The chemicals revealed what the human eye could not. They told a story of a desperate, frantic battle against time and biology. They told a story that was violent and final. The team leader took photographs, the specialist light capturing the glowing evidence of what had happened. Every scrub mark, every faint trace, was a word in a sentence that completely, utterly refuted the story Jesse was telling just a few miles away. He claimed they had parted ways at the door. But the room, in its chemical, silent language, told a different story. It told the truth. It told them that Grace had been in that room, and that something terrible had happened on that carpet. The room was a silent witness, and it had just delivered its testimony. Jesse was brought back to the same, featureless interview room. This time, the detective's patient, neutral expression was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hard focus. "We have a problem, Jesse," the detective began, his voice flat. He did not wait for an answer. "You told us you parted ways at the hotel entrance. You said you never went up to the room." Jesse shifted, his cooperative mask still in place. "That's right. Like I said." "Stop," the detective commanded. The word cut through Jesse's lie. "We have the hotel's video feed. We have you and Grace, together, getting into the elevator at 9:41 p.m., on December 1st. We have you leaving the next morning, December 2nd, alone." Jesse's easy posture tightened. The first crack had appeared. He opened his mouth, but the detective continued. "And my team has been in your room for the last 3 hours. They said the smell of bleach and carpet cleaner was overwhelming. They found what you tried to scrub away, Jesse. They found the traces you left behind. The color drained from Jesse's face. The helpful witness was gone, replaced by a cornered man. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. He stared at the detective, his mind racing, searching for an exit. He could see the first version, his simple, clean lie, had been utterly destroyed. He had to give them something else. He had to build a new story, one that fit the new facts. He let out a long, shaky breath. He looked down at the table. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. I lied. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." "Scared of what?" "We did go up," Jesse said, his voice taking on a new tone, one of intimate confession. "We went up to the room, and it was amazing. The connection was immediate. We were talking, laughing. It was intense." The detective just watched, his face unreadable. She was adventurous, Jesse continued, building his new narrative piece by piece. She was different. We started exploring. She wanted to. She talked about games. "Games?" the detective asked. "Games of trust," Jesse said, his voice dropping. She talked about popular books, about boundaries, about sensation. She wanted to try things. She asked me to be firm with her. She asked me to restrain her. It was all her idea. It was a shared thing. He was painting a new picture, not of a man and a victim, but of two equal partners in a private, intimate exploration. "Tell me what happened," the detective said, his voice still devoid of emotion. Jesse leaned forward, his hands now clashed tightly. He seemed to be reliving the memory, his words careful, chosen. "It was consensual," he insisted, the word hanging in the air. "Completely. We were both, in the moment. It was part of this game. This trust exercise. She wanted to explore the edge, the sensation." He described a night of escalating intimacy, using vague but evocative terms. He spoke of shared exploration and intense connection. He claimed that, at her specific request, he had used restraint. He was careful to frame every action as a response to her desire. She liked the feeling of it, he said, his voice low. The trust, the surrender. We were both enjoying it. The detectives in the observation room watched, their stomachs tightening. They were listening to the foundation of his defense being built. He was recasting the events, turning them from something dark into something shared, something that had simply, tragically, gone wrong. "And then what?" the detective in the room asked. Jesse's face crumpled. He looked away, as if overcome. I don't know," he stammered. "It was late. We were both tired, but still connected. I think I went to the shower. I fell asleep. I was exhausted." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "When I woke up, she was just still. She wasn't moving. I thought she was sleeping. I went to her. I touched her, and she was cold." He put his face in his hands. "I don't know what happened," he choked out. "It must have been an accident. A terrible, awful accident. I panicked. I panicked." This was the second version. It was a story of a romantic, adventurous night that had ended in a one-in-a-million tragedy. It was a story of a man who had not intended any harm, a man who had simply freaked out when faced with an impossible situation. "I didn't know what to do," he insisted, his voice rising. "I was terrified. I thought, who would believe me? I made a mistake. I panicked. But I didn't. I didn't do anything to her. It was an accident. It was just a terrible accident." Jesse's performance was compelling. The panic defense was plausible, if self-serving. It fit the known facts of them being in the room. It explained, in a way, why he might have tried to clean up. But while Jesse was telling his story of a spontaneous, tragic accident, the digital forensics team was presenting its own findings. And their report told a story not of panic, but of planning. "He says he panicked," the digital forensics analyst told the lead detective. "But his phone says he was planning this." The detective looked at the report, and the blood ran cold. The evidence was undeniable. It was a list of Google searches made from Jesse's phone. The timestamps were what mattered. They were not from the morning of December 2nd, in the frantic hours after he panicked. They were from December 1st, before he had even met Grace for their date. The search terms were chillingly specific. Remote locations: Auckland. Waitakere ranges. How to hide a body. The accident narrative evaporated. The panic defense was a lie. This was not a spontaneous tragedy. It was a premeditated event. He had gone on that date, smiling and charming, with a plan already forming in his mind. And there was more. The analyst pulled up a second folder. He also took photographs, the analyst said, his voice grim. In the hours after her passing, the detective looked at the images. They were not the frantic, blurry snapshots of a man in a panic. They were cold, methodical. The first images were taken in the hotel room. The final images were the most horrifying. They showed her, later, after he had completed his work, inside the new suitcase he had bought. This was not a man who was scared. This was not a man who had made a mistake. This was a man who was documenting his process. The combination of the searches and the photographs painted a portrait of a cold, calculated individual moving through a planned sequence of events. The evidence now painted the full, horrifying picture of December 2nd, 2018. Jesse's actions that day were not the random movements of a panicked man. They were the deliberate, methodical steps of a cleanup operation. After he had purchased the suitcase and the cleaning supplies, he had returned to the room. He had worked for hours, scrubbing, bleaching, trying to erase her from the apartment. He had then undertaken the grim, physical task of placing her remains into the suitcase he had so carefully measured just hours before. At some point, he had a date with another woman, a chilling interlude where he had calmly asked for advice on how to make a problem disappear. Then, he had rented a car. He had been seen on surveillance footage in the hotel elevator, reappearing with a porter's trolley. On it were several bags, and the one large, dark suitcase, now visibly heavy. He wheeled it through the lobby, into the car park, and loaded it into the trunk of the rental. His next trip was to a hardware store. He was filmed buying a shovel. He then began the longest drive. He drove out of the city, following the directions to the location he had already researched. The remote, dense bushland of the Waitakere ranges. It was not a frantic dash, it was a purposeful journey. He found a secluded spot, far from any trail, and there, in the quiet of the bush, he used the shovel he had just purchased. He worked, creating a shallow resting place. He drove back to the city, his terrible task complete. He stopped at a car wash, where he was recorded paying particular attention to the trunk. He stopped at random trash cans along the way, disposing of her belongings, piece by piece, severing the last physical links she had to the world. He had tried to erase her. He had tried to make her vanish from the hotel, from the city, from the earth itself. It was not a panic. It was a plan. Armed with the phone's search history, the GPS data, and now, a broken Jesse's final, unavoidable confession, the police knew where to go. The search had a destination. On December 9, 2018, a team of officers was guided to the remote spot in the Waitakere ranges. It was just as the data had indicated, secluded, quiet, and off the path. And there, they found her. Grace was returned to her family. The post-mortem examination was conducted immediately. The cause of her passing was confirmed. It was a direct, physical act. It was not a passive, unexplained accident, but the examination revealed more. The pathologist's report was a stark, scientific rebuttal of Jesse's consensual game story. It detailed bruises on her arms. It detailed bruises on her chest. These were not the ambiguous marks of an intimate game. The report was precise. The marks were consistent with being pinned down, the clear, physical evidence of a struggle, of force being applied against her will. She had not been a willing participant. She had been overpowered. The story Jesse had so carefully constructed, the narrative of shared, adventurous intimacy, was, just like his first story, a complete and utter lie. The truth was not in his words. It was written on her body. The courtroom was packed every day. The air was thick with tension. David sat in the front row, a silent, constant presence. His face, a mask of grief, enduring every word, every horrific detail. The trial was a battle of two irreconcilable stories. The defense presented its case. They did not deny Jesse was responsible for her passing. Instead, they argued for a lesser charge. They leaned heavily into the second version. The media dubbed it the 50 Shades defense. They painted a picture of a night of consensual, exploratory intimacy between two young adults. They argued that Grace had been a willing participant, that she had asked for the game, and that it had all gone tragically, accidentally wrong. They portrayed Jesse as a young man, not a monster, who had made a series of terrible decisions in a state of pure panic. Then, the prosecution stood. This was not a game, the prosecutor said, his voice echoing in the silent room. This was not an accident. This was a calculated act of violence. They systematically dismantled the defense, piece by piece, with the cold, hard facts of the investigation. They presented the Google searches from before the date. Is this the mind of a man preparing for a date? The prosecutor asked. Or is this the mind of a predator planning a disposal? They put the other woman on the stand. She recounted her date with Jesse on December 2nd, her voice trembling as she described him asking her, hypothetically, about where to hide a body from the police, while Grace was already gone. They presented the post-mortem report. The bruises. The evidence of her being pinned down. This was not consent. This was a struggle. And finally, they showed the photographs Jesse had taken. The cold, documentary-style images. This is not panic, the prosecutor concluded, his voice filled with quiet rage. This is not an accident, this is predation. This is not a game gone wrong. This was a plan that went exactly as he intended, until he was caught. The jury was sent to deliberate. The wait for the jury was not long. They returned. The courtroom held its breath. David stared straight ahead. The verdict was read. Guilty. A sound, a single, sharp exhale, was heard from the front row. David closed his eyes. The first small release of an unbearable pressure he had carried for months. Justice had been done. On February 21, 2020, Jesse was sentenced. He was given life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. The trial was over. But the story was not. In the following weeks, Jesse's face was everywhere. On the news, in newspapers, online. And in different parts of the country, other women were watching. A first woman came forward. She recognized his face. She recognized his charm. She recognized the game. She told police her own story of a date with him, of an encounter that had turned dark, of a consensual act that had quickly become something else, something she had to fight her way out of. Then, a second woman came forward. Her story was terrifyingly similar. A date, the charm, the game, the sudden, frightening shift, the struggle, the escape. Jesse was tried for these assaults. He was found guilty on those charges as well. More time was added to his sentence. The final, horrifying truth settled upon everyone. The echoes of these other stories, these other near misses, made one thing clear. Grace had not been the first person he had done this to. She was not an accident. She was not a one-in-a-million tragedy. She was simply the one who had not managed to escape. Thank you for following this story with me. I hope to see you again next time.